Australia's construction sector is buckling under the pressure of rising insolvencies. New data obtained by ASIC reveals more than 2,000 external administrators were lodged last financial year. That's a 75% jump from the previous year. High interest rates and rising input costs are being attributed to companies collapsing and developers shelving projects. Builders are warning they cannot cope with the work they took on during the pandemic. Joining me now, Tim Reardon, Chief Economist with the Housing Industry Association. Talk us through what's actually happening here. Is this a growing problem, or is it sort of we've hit the peak of this because of what happened during and after COVID?
Yeah, there's really two things going on in today's data. One, this is largely a ripple effect of what happened last year, and that is builders did take on a lot more work, or a certain cohort of residential home builders did take on more work than they could cope with, and they saw very rapid increases in prices. And those fixed price contracts caused what we describe as red contracts, where they were unable to build the home for the cost, and therefore they got into financial difficulty. What's coming through in the market now is really just lagged data turning up and reflecting that. And the second thing that's turning up in building construction data at the moment is that it's not those residential home builders that were under pressure 12 months ago, it's now the subcontractors that sit underneath those residential home builders that have seen an increase in workload through this cycle. And now, given 12 months of rising cash rates, we're starting to see the volume of building work on the ground slow, which means demand for those skilled workers is coming off. We're also going to see some of those trade contractor prices coming down, and it's that ripple effect. And there's many more subcontractors in the industry than builders, and so they're making up the lion's share of those numbers. Now, from the ASIC data, I expect that we're probably still at least 3 to 6 months away from those figures reaching their peak. So the official data will continue to say that the situation's getting worse.
But a lot of those things have happened.
That's
it's
right.
Just the figures are feeding through.
So
right. You mentioned the lack of demand. I mean, seemingly we've got migration. Well, we know that's picking right up. But the lack of demand is what? Just because of interest rates and people are going, I'll do what I can until then. And so there's actually slack to pick up. If people could somehow afford to build houses, we've got people ready to do it.
Yeah, that's exactly right. So it is simply the rise in the cash rate. Cash rate rises, people build fewer homes. A very simple story there. In addition to the rise in the cash rate, we've also got land prices have increased and the cost of building have increased through that cycle. So simply as something gets more expensive, you get less of it. Now, in terms of underlying problems, from that supply and demand equation, this is a relatively short-term cycle. We have to look at population and migration over sort of more of a 5 to 10 year cycle than on any individual year. So there's 2 years without population, 2 years with record levels of migration, offset each other largely. But we are expecting next year to commence construction of the fewest number of homes for more than a decade. So back below 100,000 detached homes in the course of a year. That's going to be a real cold shower for builders. And that's a very different cycle to what we've seen last year. And builders do typically go broke on the upswing, not on the downswing, which is what we're seeing now.
Yeah, albeit so there's going to be demand for housing, fewer of them built. So I guess the key thing is rates may be starting to come down next year, and then people going and being willing to go out there and build. A year ago, the line was sort of like, well, if you want to build, good luck to do anything. So that's changed now. If you've been putting off that reno or whatever it is.
It's time to get started on that process. So even as we see the number of homes commencing construction slow to its lowest level in a decade, the volume of homes under construction at the moment is roughly double what it was pre-pandemic. So there's still a lot of work on the ground to complete, and that's going to take through until early next year. So
and that's the point where there'll be all this sort of slack.
More abundant labour, yeah. And so the Reserve Bank's looking for unemployment to get to 4.5%, and it's not until we finish building all of the homes that are on the ground at the moment that the building industry is going to stop absorbing any excess labour in the economy, and it's only at that point, early next year, mid next year, that we'll start to see the unemployment rate pick up as the Reserve Bank's looking for.
Is it the... I'm trying to think of a term here that won't get me in trouble, but I'll say it anyway. Is it the dodgy builders that go out of business? Is it the ones that sort of maybe cut corners? Let's make a mozza in 10 years and who cares? We'll phoenix and get out of it.
If we divide builders into 3 cohorts, the volume builders who are often foreign-owned, very large corporate entities. We have the mum and dad builders who are building less than 15 homes per year. It's the cohort in the middle that have got themselves into particular trouble in this cycle. That's because they saw that there was strong demand and they attempted to grow the size of their business from being a small business to a medium or a medium
Look
to
at these
large.
Prices. I'll take on that, I'll take on that.
Yeah. And
too many, they happen more slowly and prices rise more over that period. And then suddenly And they often say, hey, can you pay more to finish this home? And someone says no, and that's like they go, well, I'm going to go bust if you don't, and that's the stalemate you get to.
That's the equation that happens with fixed price contracts, and we have seen a lot of that over the course of the past couple of years. But with 12 months now of rising rates, sales have slowed down. We're largely through those red contracts, and builders that are still operating now have managed that process. And so now they enter a different cycle where the problem is that they are now pursuing customers, and we're starting to see that discounting and competition in the market from builders chasing customers rather than the last couple of years of customers walking in.
Clearly I did my repairs at the wrong time. I was chewing your ear off around my experiences. What do you make of quality build in Australia as well? Lots of calls for regulation, so many stories around people that, desperately save up and they lose their deposit. They might have an apartment with all sorts of issues and, they can't afford to fix it. Do we have a problem in Australia, do you think?
I don't think we have a structural problem in Australia. We've certainly gone through a cycle where there has been an enormous volume of homes built, and there's been builders under pressure to find materials, and as a consequence they have had to change their construction techniques and possibly engage people that weren't their first choice subcontractors.
So when you get a huge rush in anything, the quality dissipates.
Well, I think we should also note that from a consumer perspective, there is insurance provisions in place there in most jurisdictions for most types of dwellings as well. So, and there is strict regulation around building in terms of certification and engineering and ongoing inspections as the construction is underway. But no doubt there have been more homes built over the past couple of years and therefore more defects.